Hey everybody, it's Matt here at pianoblog.com. I'm a couple days behind on Q&As for this week, so sorry if you sent a question in, I will get to it. I've just been moving one of the schools and a huge lease signing and everything that's involved with that, so I've been kind of knocked off my feet for a couple days. But I am keeping track of your questions, so don't worry, I will get to them. So today we're going to talk about getting nervous in front of your piano teacher or in piano lessons and how to deal with that sort of thing. And I think I'm going to break this video into two segments, so two videos, because this is a broad subject. And this is a question that has been asked a couple times, but most recently by a longtime piano blog reader. And the question really is simply, I get really nervous when I'm in piano lessons, when I'm with my piano teacher. How do I deal with this, or what does that mean, and what should I do about it? So because this is a broad topic, I might ramble a little bit. I'm going to try and approach it from several different angles, and hopefully if you have this trouble or this problem, some of this will be helpful for you. So the first thing to note before we talk about this is it's normal to get nervous. It would actually be abnormal if you weren't nervous to some degree. And even in a piano lesson situation, what I have found, especially in working with adult students, is as we become adults, when we're kids, we're used to people kind of telling us what to do and getting feedback. But it can be a little bit weird when you're an adult to suddenly be placed in this position where someone's watching you and criticizing you. And for a lot of adults, it just takes a few lessons to kind of get in that kind of mindset where, okay, I'm back to this learning mindset where I might be receiving some criticism. And especially because the piano and music and art is something very personal, you're really being criticized on something that's very personal to you and something that is very complex, it's very difficult. So all of that kind of combined can create a scenario where it's really pretty normal to be at least a little bit nervous. And most everyone I know gets a little bit nervous in these situations. I certainly, especially when I was in college with some of my advanced teachers, was very nervous sometimes before a piano lesson because I wanted to play my best. But what we're talking about here is if you're an adult student, and especially you're just kind of playing for your own pleasure, but you're practically incapacitated in piano lessons and it's really sucking the fun out of it. So I guess the first point is just temper your expectations a little bit. You want maybe to have a little bit of nervousness, but it should be kind of a positive nervousness, at least as you get going after the first several weeks and you're kind of comfortable with the teacher. It shouldn't be to the point of, man, I'm just dreading this upcoming piano lesson every week, because that's not fun, and at some point you're going to burn out. Now, one thing to note, and the reason I'm going to divide this into two videos is that the nervousness can be a result of many different factors, and the kind of two big areas that we want to talk about is, are you nervous because your piano teacher is kind of making you nervous because of their personality and that it's a personality mismatch? Or are you nervous just as a person? So for example, I, in my teaching, tend to be pretty encouraging, pretty relaxed, at least most times, especially with adult students who are playing more for their pleasure. But I've had adult students come to me, and you would be surprised that some of them could not function very well, and we had to find remedies for that. So, in that case, I would like to think at least it wasn't my personality or anything I was doing that was creating that sort of nervousness in the lesson. So we're going to deal first with what do you do, or what do you think about if your teacher is making you nervous? And one thing to note about teachers is some of them become very direct over time. So you want to distinguish between, is your teacher making you nervous because they're a jerk, or is your teacher making you nervous because they just are kind of direct in what they're asking you to do at the piano? And I think a lot of teachers, as they teach, over 20 years or more, or 30 years, whatever, when a student comes to me, almost within the first 20 seconds, I can kind of tell you, okay, these are the things that probably need to be done. This is what the next year of lessons is going to look like. And so you become very direct in your advice sometimes because, you sort of know what has to be done. Now, a good teacher can temper that and kind of be aware of the feedback that they're getting, but do be aware that don't confuse someone who's direct with necessarily attacking you personally. So that's the first thing that you want to kind of distinguish. Is the teacher just maybe a little bit direct, or is this person kind of attacking me? So attacking you would be doing things like, making you feel bad, saying something like, you're just really bad at this, or, that kind of attitude. You really don't want that in piano lessons. But if they're just giving kind of direct feedback, that might be just a teaching style and not necessarily a bad one. And kind of along with that, you want to ask yourself, have I tried other teachers? Sometimes it's just a personality mismatch. So you might feel really comfortable with one person and not comfortable with another person. And in that case, there's nothing wrong, especially if you're playing for your own pleasure, with going with the person that you're comfortable with, as long as you feel like you're getting a good education from them. So even if the teacher's not necessarily being mean necessarily, or being too direct, or expecting too much, sometimes it's just a personality mismatch. I've seen students here at the school opt for one teacher over another, and I've been very surprised. It's like, wow, you really didn't like this teacher. I think they're very nice and a very good teacher, but it's a personality thing. So there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with trying out different teachers and seeing who you mesh with. And kind of part of that is you have to ask yourself, assuming this teacher isn't berating you, isn't kind of tearing you up on a personal level, you have to ask yourself, is it worth it to be nervous? So, for example, I always think of the stories of Rudolf Serkin, who was one of the great pianists of the 20th century. My teacher in high school was a Serkin student, and there are a lot of, he taught a lot of students, and many of them would say, before I had a lesson with Rudolf Serkin, I was just so scared to go into that lesson. There's stories of these kind of teenagers in high school or whatever practicing for just like whole swaths of day, and I forget who the pianist was, but he talks about how he would practice so much before his lessons with Serkin, like for 2 or 3 days before, that people would slowly just start leaving the house. Like his father would leave, his mother would leave, his siblings would leave, because they just couldn't take any more piano playing. So in that case, in that scenario, because that particular person really wants to become a piano performer, is very, very serious, it's actually good in a way for them to be nervous up to a certain point. That kind of pressure is something where they're learning how to deal with being under pressure, because that's going to be part of being a piano performer, having a career in music. Now, there's limits to that, right? Like, you don't want to build necessarily the kind of an anxiety into all of your piano playing, but in that context, it might be good to have a teacher who's putting a little bit of pressure on. On the other side of that spectrum is, if you are an adult student who's playing for your own pleasure and just wants music to be part of your life, and I think this accounts for 99% of adult students that I've worked with. In that case, it's probably a lot less worth it for you to be distraught about your piano lessons. You might want someone who's kind of being a little bit of a personal trainer and holding you to playing, practicing and playing up to a certain level, but you definitely don't want something where every week you're going in and kind of feeling on edge. So you have to really determine all of this based on your own context, and you certainly shouldn't feel guilty or like, oh wow, I have to kind of overcome this nervousness if it's a situation where it's not worth it for your own personal goals. So I think that, you know, I've kind of covered several things here. We've talked about distinguishing between whether the teacher is direct or whether they're being rude. We've talked about whether you've tried different teachers, because it can be a personality thing. And then again, a lot of it's just your own goals, your own context, and whether it's worth it for you to be under that kind of pressure. So that's the first video. Some general thoughts on what to do if it's your piano teacher that's kind of creating nervousness. And in the next video, I'm going to talk more about what to do if you, just as a personality, tends to get nervous no matter who the other person is. And usually it's a mixture of both. But I'll see you in the next video, and happy practicing.